Now that we have created our blog post editor component, let's build the pages of our application to create new blog posts or edit draft and publish blog posts. So create a new file named new.js inside the pages folder, which we will use to build the page to allow our users to create new blog posts using our editor component. Start by importing the layout section and the editor component at the top. Then create the new draft component and return the JSX for this page by rendering the editor. Set the onChange prop to it and define the handle onChange method above the return statement. Use Axios to perform a post request to the /API/post endpoint to create a new blog post with the title, the content, and the author of the post as the current logged in user. For that, we need to import Axios and the use session hook from Next.js/client. Then we also need to call use session to retrieve the current session at the top of our component. Next, get the ID of the newly created blog post and use this ID to redirect the user to the draft page of that blog post using the Next.js router. So import the use router hook from Next/router and call it at the top of your component. Finally, if something goes wrong, just display an error message using React Autos. Now let's create the dynamic page for the draft. So start by creating a new file called id wrap around square brackets .js inside the draft folder. Import all the necessary dependencies at the top, create the draft component, and export it as default. Then get the Next.js router module with the use router hook and get the current session with the use session hook. Create a new state variable to keep track of when we are publishing the draft, and create another state variable to keep track of the saving status of our draft. Initialize it with save by default. Next, use the useSWR hook to fetch the data of the current draft only if the current user is logged in. So if the user is authenticated, return /API/post and the ID of the post from the router query object as the query key for SWR. Otherwise, return null to not fetch anything. Finally, pass the fetcher function we have created earlier to fetch the data. Now, let's create the layout of our page. If we get an error when fetching the data, we just render a basic layout with an error message stating that we are unable to retrieve the current draft. Otherwise, if we have retrieved the data of this draft properly, we render the editor component. We pass the data retrieved with SWR to the initial data prop. We show the delete button and the publish button as well. We set the disable prop using the publishing state variable value, and we specify the onChange, onPublish, and onDelete event props. Next, let's go back up and actually define those event handler functions. Let's start with the handle onPublic function, which accepts a title and a content parameters. If the title is not empty, set the publishing state variable to true, and display a loading indicator with React Autos. Store the ID of the toast in a variable as we will need it once we are done publishing the draft. Next, use Axios to perform a post request to the /API/post/published with the current post ID, along with the updated data, the title, and the content. Then, use the mutate function provided by SWR to update the local data with the updated data returned by the query. Note that I pass false as the second argument to disable the revalidation. Otherwise, SWR will have performed a new request to revalidate the data, which is not necessary in our case. Then, display a message using the toast function to let the users know we are redirecting him to a new page. Here, I'm using the toast ID we have stored earlier to update the loading toast with this message instead of creating a new one. Then, redirect the user to the actual page of the published blog post using its slug value. Finally, if the title is empty, we don't run anything, and we display a message to the user to let him know that the title is missing. And if something goes wrong inside our function, we also display a message for the user and set the publishing state variable back to false. Alright, now let's go ahead and create the next event handler, which is the handle onDelete function. Let's start by asking the user to confirm if he actually wants to delete this draft using window.confirm and passing a text message. If the user clicks OK, then we can delete this draft from the database. Otherwise, we do nothing. So again, we start by displaying a toast message to let the user know that we have started deleting the blog post. Then we perform the query with Axios. And once the query has been fulfilled, we remove the toast message from the screen and we redirect the user back to /draft/me. And again, if something goes wrong, we just display an error message for the user as usual. And that's it for this function. Now let's create the last event handler, handle onChange. Set the value of the saving status variable to saving, then perform the update using Axios to send a patch request to the right API endpoint, along with the updated data. Then mutate the local data and set the value of the saving status variable back to saved. And if something goes wrong, set its value to error. Alright, now let's add the indicator of the saving status into our JSX so that the users know when we are saving its changes, once the post has been saved, or when the saving procedure failed. For that, inside your JSX, above the editor component, add a p element, and for each saving status, render an icon with some text. Alright, we are done with this page. We have one more to create, but it is very similar to this one. So let's copy everything from this file. Then create a new folder named edit and a new file inside that folder named id wrap around square brackets .js. We'll use this page to display the editor to edit the blog post that has been published already. As the layout is similar to the page we have just created, you can paste everything here and change the name of the React component to edit. Then we need to update the redirect URL inside the onDelete method on line 60 from /draft/me to /post/me. Next, you can remove the handle onChange method as we don't want to automatically push changes as the user is typing because we are dealing with a published blog post now and not a draft anymore. Then you can remove everything from the JSX about the saving status and remove the onChange prop from the editor component. Alright, now let's add a link to the published blog post page. So open the slug.js file from the post folder, and inside the JSX, just before the header closing tag, add a new Next.js link component to redirect the user to the editing page of that blog post. Let's also wrap the author section and our new link inside the div element so that everything is aligned properly on the screen thanks to Tailwind CSS. Next, add the Tailwind Css Typography classes to the main element of this page, which is the one that renders the blog post content. And as we did with our editor preview section, use React Markdown to parse and render Markdown into our JSX. Finally, don't forget to import it at the top along with the MD components module. Alright, now save all your files, open your browser, and refresh the page if necessary. If you click the Write a blog post button, you should be redirected to the /new page which render our blog post editor component. From here, we can start typing the title of our new blog posts. And once we stop typing, after a few milliseconds, we are redirected to the draft editing page, as you can see from the URL. We also now have the saving status at the top of our page, and all the available actions we have implemented as well. So now I can start writing the content of my blog post, and as you may notice, as I'm typing, my draft is automatically updated as expected. I can also preview the formatted Markdown of my blog post content from the Preview tab. And of course, if I add a code snippet to my content, it is properly highlighted, which is easier to read. Alright, now let's try to publish our draft by clicking the Publish button. As you can see, we have the toast message at the top as expected, and we get redirected to the Publish blog post page when it has been published successfully. You can see that from the new URL, which is now /posts/ and the slug value of our blog posts. Inside that page, we have everything we expected, such as the title, the author, the publishing date time, and of course, the blog post content formatted properly. And we also have the edit link that we can click to access the editing page of that blog post. Here, we can update our blog post and publish it again. As you can see, everything is working fine. And if you go to your blog post page, you should see your blog post at the top of your list. Finally, you can also delete a blog post from its editing page by clicking the Delete button. Here, if you confirm that action, your blog post will be deleted. Once it's done, you get redirected to your blog page where you can see that this post does not exist anymore.